Popular song does not illustrate some grand history which happens elsewhere in muddy trenches or oak-panelled offices. It is part of history. Popular song is a series of mass activities, singing along, going to the music hall, buying sheet music, for example, which are tremendously important to the people involved and which form part of the history of society. You will see in my title, I have moved away from the word propaganda and tried to say something more precise. Popular music certainly helped the war drive, in contrast to grand patriotic statements by ministers or bishops, or even by trade union or feminist leaders. It was perceived as coming from ordinary people, is sung by working class singers without posh accents, and is enjoyed on a sweet Saturday night in our favourite place among friends. But popular song has its own grammar. Governments do not write or commission pop songs. The most they can do is censor them. And popular songs whose objective is to move and cheer people, not to inform them, are unlikely to be effective if simply containing official lies. Nevertheless, popular songs played a key role in reinforcing war priorities, while sometimes exploring, in a reassuring manner, human tragedies or social changes. Now, the work I'm going to look at today began when I was writing these books. The first one, published by Routledge in 2015 and 2 years earlier in French, was a cultural and social history of popular songs and their industry, based on a corpus of just over 1,000 British songs from the war years. The second was a collective volume looking at song in 8 different countries from a social, economic, cultural, musicological and political point of view. This work has since developed in a number of directions, and I'm particularly interested today in a comparative approach. Work on the French repertoire has mostly been carried out by my colleague Anne Simon. She found there were tens of thousands of songs in the Paris police archives, helpfully divided into categories: approved as written, approved with changes, or rejected in full. And this allows us to see both what songwriters felt the audiences needed to hear and what government censors thought they ought to hear. She chose to concentrate on songs about couples, but there is much more work to be done. These popular songs were sung on stage and sold as sheet music. The most successful could sell 1 million copies of sheet music. Gramophone records or phonograph cylinders remained relatively marginal on a mass scale. There were 3 million pianos in Britain in 1914, many thousands of street singers, and millions of middle-class musical evenings and working-class family sing-alongs. In Britain in 1916, for the price of the cheapest gramophone, you could get 220 tickets to go to the music hall. These songs have been much ignored by historians. For several decades, almost no serious work was done on popular song during the First World War, for a number of reasons. Firstly, the value of a popular song as a historical document was not recognized. Secondly, perhaps it seemed frivolous to work on joyful entertainment from such a dark period. Thirdly, the period of the First World War often attracted conservative historians, since left-wing historians preferred to study periods in which working-class solidarity, rather than working-class shooting each other, were at the centre of class experience. And yet it was more left-wing scholars who were more likely to value popular song as vernacular expression. Among the many dozens of First World War historians, there was a general ignorance about the songs. History books would always quote the same dozen songs and take it for granted that these patriotic songs were typical. So even such a great historian as Arthur Marwick said, for Britain, popular patriotic songs, or songs like the nostalgic Tipperary, accounted for the bulk of the records pressed during the war. This is completely untrue. Since the archival work had not yet been done, completely false ideas could be accepted. In reality, First World War songs in Britain were extremely varied in theme, and the vast majority of them did not mention the war or patriotism in any form. Anne Simons explains similarly what happened when she began to work on popular song archives in Paris. She says, "We were expecting lyrics full of cliches centered on patriotism. The least one could say is that there was a huge surprise in store for us." In the British case, I was able to do some approximate statistics, as you can see. 3/4 of popular songs did not refer to the war in any way at all. People continued wanting to sing about love, exotic fantasy, knockabout comedy, mothers-in-law and shy fiancés were among the favourite topics. But new themes were added that could express popular anxieties, generally without threatening a consensus about the necessity of the war, which could sometimes be fragile. Love songs and songs dreaming of a distant rural paradise were very popular. If we look at the British repertoire for the First World War years, the early part of World War I saw dozens of enthusiastic recruitment songs and pieces defending the Empire's cause. Some of these were straightforward, with titles such as "Won't You Join the Army?" or "Men of Britain, You Have Got to Go." Remember, the British Army was a volunteer army until 1916. Some used seductive discourses insisting that men who joined the army would get the girls. Oh, I do feel so proud of you, I do, honor bride. I'm going to give you an extra cuddle tonight. I didn't like you much before you joined the army, John, but I do like your cocky, now you've got your cocky on. Others carried out important ideological work, such as the song they sang, "God Save Our King," which insisted that one could love one's individual country, Ireland, England, Scotland or Wales, and also be delighted to join the British Army. Should old acquaintance be forgot, the Scotsman sang with pride. Men of Harlech march to glory, the gallant Welshman cried. God save Ireland, sang a hero with a real old Irish swing. Then every mother's son proudly held a gun and sang, "God save our King." This was not a trivial question. Recruitment campaigns were having little success in Wales and Scotland, where political traditions were anti-militarist. Despite these patriotic songs, they are essentially restricted to 1914. Very quickly, recruitment songs and glory of war songs almost completely disappeared. The 1915 Book of Greatest Hits, published by one of the main publishers, contained not one recruitment song, although the recruitment campaign was in its most fierce period. People still wanted to win the war, but for a song to be a success at the musical, the entire audience had to sing along, and joyful Join the Army songs could not expect unanimous approval once the first heavy casualty figures had come in. A jolly tone was generally compulsory in the British repertoire, and the romantic was appearing very, very slowly. Most of the love songs were not really romantic. The girl was beautiful, with cheeks of red and eyes of blue. The love was perfect. Marriage was imminent. Only slowly during the war did a more psychological, intense romantic tone come in. There is a complete absence, unlike of the French and US repertoires, there are no songs about hating Germans and no songs about killing, dying and mutilation. Finally, after several decades of campaigns to clean up the music hall, by 1914, frankly, rude songs would not get on stage, although indirectly suggestive ones did. Tight skirts have got to go, or Nothing But Boys and Khaki by the Seaside. What about anti-war songs? Once war broke out, these were not seen on the variety stage, on the musical stage. It would have been impossible to get the whole house singing along to an anti-war song, and the theatre manager, by this time part of the local elite, would not have allowed it. But anti-war songs were popular at campaign meetings, such as those of the Stop the War campaign in 1916, which was strong enough to organise gatherings in hundreds of towns across Britain. This did not mean that dissenting songs could not get on stage. On 1916, a few anti-conscription songs were hits. In particular, The Military Representative, which comically portrayed an idiotic officer refusing to exempt anyone from military service, even if they were 92 years old or already dead. Let us look now at the French repertoire. There were plenty of anti-German songs, the revival of Provençal songs like Le Fils de l'Allemand, in which a German soldier whose wife has died in childbirth brings his baby to a young French mother to ask her to save its life by breastfeeding it. And the mother refused with the word, "My breasts are French, my children shall sing the Marseillaise. I will not sell my milk to the son of a German." As for the violence, there are a number of songs about the joy of killing. Rosalie, a 1915 song, is a love song to a bayonet. Rosalie is so pretty, she has 2 or 3 million boyfriends. Let's drink to that. In the midst of battle, she pricks and pierces and she cuts. She blocks an attack and pushes right through. Let's drink to that. This song was given away as a free supplement to the Petit Journal, a newspaper which sold 800,000 copies a day. The same author wrote a love song to a machine gun, Mimi, a song which puts new words to a well-known piece. Quand elle chante à sa manière, taratataratataratataratataire, ah que ce vraiment chante, c'est comme un oiseau qui chante. He says, the lyricist says at the end, the narrator says at the end, he will cry tears when he has to say goodbye to his machine gun. The French repertoire has many thorough explanations of people's worries in intimate and heartbreaking, if melodramatic, situations. In one song, a soldier home on leave after a year sees a baby in a cradle through the window. He is about to leave without seeing his wife, but his wife arrives and explains she has taken in an orphaned baby. The lyricist wanted the artist to sing of the real and complex worries of men and women at the time. As Anne Simon points out, the songs portray men and women who miss the affection of their partners, who miss making love to them. They speak of the excruciating anguish of the mutilated soldiers and of the terrible sadness of their mothers. They speak of the terror of the young man that his wife might be unfaithful while he's away, and the determination of women to participate in the war effort. They speak of the fear when the postman comes and the dilemma of women raped and made pregnant by German soldiers. This treasure chest of moving stories does, however, frequently include wartime patriotic priorities. A soldier narrator who has run a prostitution network before the war is shown writing to his prostitute partner, insisting that the war had changed him and that after the war, both of them should get honest work. Another song insists that in the trenches, men from all social classes, the workers and the toughs, as they say, get on very well. And this newfound brotherhood, according to the song, will change society once the war is over. The songs reassure the audiences by presenting soldiers as virtuous, showing those blinded or mutilated as optimistic or proud, showing that wives of mutilated soldiers will still love them and will replace them as the main family earner. Others are more directly propagandistic. A song about the Gare de l'Est, the railway station where soldiers arrived or departed to the war, says, they've all got mud right up to their balls and a lot of them are covered in lice, but still they are joyful and ready to fight. So I've looked at the two repertoires, and now I come to the only really interesting point, in my opinion, that a historian, or the only interesting question a historian has to ask, which is why? And it is a mistake, which is often made, to think that the differences in repertoires are due to differences in the personality or the soul of the French people or the English people. Although one is occasionally tempted when we see the amount of sex in the French songs and the complete absence of sex in the British songs. The first important difference is the industrial framework. In the British case, the singer moved from town to town once a week and performed in a large music hall of 1,000 to 3,000 people. He or she went on stage, sometimes literally, after the elephants and before the acrobats, and sang perhaps 3 songs in an almost circus-like atmosphere. Reflective or even romantic singing was extremely difficult. The audience did not come for a particular singer, they came for a variety evening. The popular music sector in France was much less industrialized. The venues were generally smaller, and people would often come to listen to a particular singer, it may have been possible to build a loyal audience and therefore share with them more sophisticated products. The songwriters were also different. It seems that the lyricists were not from the same social milieu in the two countries. In any case, the list of known lyricists cited by Anne Simon includes law graduates, doctors, classicists, and another researcher, Kimmich, insists that the songwriters of the French Café Concert were from the creative and individualistic middle classes. And yet the songs tended to be in working class dialect if it was a stage dialect. In Britain, however, perhaps writing for the music hall was not respectable enough to attract classicists and doctors. Certainly the British sources suggested rather lyricists who hang around downmarket pubs hoping to catch a singer who would buy their song. The social difference could also be linked to the stabilization of lyricist income in France. In Britain at this time, almost all lyricists sold for a single cash payment of a few pounds the rights to the song. They did not receive royalties. If the song then was used 100 times or 1,000,000 times, made no difference to them. However, in France, there had been established for more than 15 years a genuine royalties section, which meant that the job of lyricist could attract people who needed a regular income. Respectability. There had been a 50-year campaign to maintain respectability in the British working class, and in particular in the music hall. The theatre managers were genuinely frightened of moralists who could report them to the magistrates who were going to control whether their license was renewed or not. The smaller venues, the Café Concert of Paris or Marseille, had somewhat more leeway. And finally, there are the song traditions. Since 1870 and the defeat of France by the German Empire, a tradition of anti-German songs had been established. And what's more, young French men had a long military service where these songs were part of their culture. In contrast, the German people may have been the closest European nation to the British. There were many German workers in the big cities, and the German band was an established and very popular musical phenomenon. In addition, in the British music halls, the huge music halls at a time when no microphones were available, audience sing-along was central. The entire audience had to sing along. Otherwise, you might not have a job the following week. It may well be that it was impossible to get audiences to sing along altogether to xenophobic songs about Germans. The US repertoire did not have this problem. It is not that there was no anti-German xenophobia. German shops were smashed up in a number of towns, but it is one thing to get together 50 or 100 people to smash up shops. No need for a wide social consensus, and quite another to get 2,000 people in a music hall to all sing along together. Finally, the French repertoire had an established tradition of the serious, realistic song presenting intimate aspects of the life of the poor in Paris in particular. The tradition was much weaker in Britain, where the circus atmosphere demanded jolly songs. So in conclusion, I've been looking at the complexity of how repertoires are formed and how supporting the war through song looked rather different in these two countries. The legal framework, the level of centralization and capitalization of the performance industry, social, political and songwriting traditions all intervene. It is in this complex web of influencing factors and not in some idea of the soul of the people, which we must look for explanations of the nature of popular song repertoire. As for propaganda, it was present in popular songs, but sometimes in quite subtle and sophisticated ways. Thank you for your attention.